I'm Rory Sutherland. I'm the Vice Chairman of Ogilvy. I'm the author of Alchemy, and I've been doing a keynote to these lovely folks here in the world of affiliate marketing. I've always been a huge fan of the product without necessarily knowing how it works behind the scenes. So this has been, I hope, as illuminating to me as a conference as I've been to the audience.
Something that actually came up in your presentation where you had said that to economists, it's a number, and to consumers, it's
a feeling.
It's a feeling. And, you know, the affiliate marketing industry is B2B or really B2B to C marketing.
It is.
Do you think that this sentiment still holds true in B2B or B2B to C marketing?
Oh, that's a good question. In B2B, I always say that fundamentally the decisions taken are kind of emotional, unless they're automated. There is still an emotional component to the decisions. The emotion is slightly different, and I always say in B2C, people are trying to minimize the risk of regret. And in B2B, they're trying to minimize the risk of blame.
Yeah.
So there is a different psychology going on in B2B decisions, which is it's not always the case, but in most B2C decisions, you don't have to justify yourself with a 7-page PowerPoint deck whenever you choose a particular brand of toothpaste. Okay, you're not required to go through that level of self-defense, and you're allowed to act on your instincts and your intuition. And in B2B, there's always that secondary question: if this goes wrong, how do I defend myself? I need, therefore, even if it's reverse engineered, a seemingly logical route by which I arrived at this decision in order to make the decision fundamentally, immune to criticism.
Is this the arse covering dressed as rigor that you were referencing a couple of times?
If the downside of that, if you take no one ever got fired for buying IBM, which is that old mantra, okay, the downside of it undoubtedly is that there's an awful lot of activity in business which isn't really designed to change the nature of the decision taken. It's to create a kind of a rational superstructure to justify the decision in the event that it leads to criticism. And so you might argue that, as human beings, as ordinary consumers, we don't need to do this, which sometimes I think occasionally means we make worse decisions. But on the other hand, we don't waste a spectacular amount of time constructing a kind of bogus post-rationalization for everything we do.
Yeah. You started off talking about bees.
Yeah.
And the waggle dance and the 80-20 kind of dynamic there in terms of efficiency. And you got this 20% of the...
20% explore, 80% exploit.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a practice taken in advertising, you've probably come across it, which is sometimes called 70-20-10.
Yeah.
What always happens, and this is the problem, is under any kind of constraint, it's the 10 that gets cut first. And in the short term, of course, that makes sense, because generally the most experimental 10% of what you do often pays back a bit more slowly than the 70. However, over a time of certainly years rather than quarters, if you stop doing the 10, there are all kinds of costs you end up paying.
Yeah.
They're just not quite as salient.
Yeah.
I mean, the vital problem is an opportunity cost. No one ever gets bollocked for missing an opportunity. Okay? So opportunity costs are much safer in a corporate world than costs.
Yeah.
And consequently, I would argue that, yes, I think nearly all businesses, particularly those constrained by sort of the need to justify their existence quarter by quarter, I think they are effectively overweighted towards exploit and underweighted towards explore. And for the same reason of justification, I think nearly all businesses are overweighted in terms of acquisition effort and underweighted in terms of customer service and retention, simply because the former is faster, more quantifiable, more attributable, and easier to justify, I think, than the latter.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're something like a bank, let's say you invest in a very clever customer service initiative, in terms of the effect on retention, it might take you years, to actually arrive at the data that justified the activity.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we've got to learn to do is sometimes there are activities where you just have to lower the barrier to proof. Make the burden of proof a little less burdensome, because the wonderful guy, John Roberts, who founded AO, if there are kids in the house and they're delivering a washing machine, they give the kids a branded bear.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as he said, I'm probably, I think he said, the biggest buyer of cuddly bears in the UK. Am I really going to demand a precise, granular return on investment for that? I mean, you could do it. You could have a control group where you don't give them a bear, you know, and you could measure the effect on repeat purchase and retention over time. But his argument is, look, some ideas are just good ideas. You know, in other words, you know, they're just talkable enough and interesting enough to justify the cost without necessarily needing to drill down into the precise and immediate return.
Is that like it's something that almost has to come from the founder or the CEO?
bit.
Because they're the ones that have the license to go off and do something left field without the justification necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, historically, within departments, people had a reasonable amount of discretionary, you know, budget, and I don't think that exists anymore. I don't. I think that's a problem actually, which is that if you look at innovations, as many of them come from the bottom up as come from the top down, and if you don't allow acts of minor mischief and insubordination at the lower levels of your organization, then you'll never make those bottom-up discoveries. You know, we can look empirically at the history of scientific discovery and go, it's actually people on the coalface noticing things who are almost more likely to come up with the next penicillin than people who have a plan.
People that know Rob and I quite well often joke that he's the ideas man and I'm the organized one. He might say that I would say all of his ideas are irrational, but I would love to ask you, what is one irrational idea you think every single marketer should try?
Well, the first thing is just actually is the process you arrive at for having ideas, which often starts with simply noticing an anomaly. Roger L. Martin has three things he thinks give rise to most, not all, but most creative strategies, which are analogy, anomaly, and trade-offs. And so the trick to the creative act is, which seems irrational, is to take something which everybody assumes is a trade-off. There's a trade-off between price and quality. There's a trade-off between X and Y. And actually, what you find is that everybody just treats that as a given, as if it's kind of Newtonian law. You might argue, okay, sometimes technology means that what used to be a trade-off no longer is. The Uber map is the example I always give, okay? Which is actually, if you give people good information about where their taxi is and when it's turning up, they're not that bothered if it arrives 5 minutes later or 5 minutes sooner, okay? What they don't like is the uncertainty, it's not the duration. And in quite a lot of cases, I think there are assumptions made. I mean, the Moxie Hotel is an very interesting case in point, which just goes, okay, we're going to focus less and less on the rooms because the fun, party-loving folks in a good location in town who are the intended target audience, they'll be out doing things, so the room is less important to them, but the communal areas are more important. So what we're going to do is we're going to zig when everybody else zags. There's a problem in business, which I sort of hinted at the beginning of my talk, when I talked about the need for comparison. So one of the things that worries me in B2B is that procurement kill innovation, because any really significant innovation is not going to be like for like comparable with what you might call your standard short list of established suppliers. Okay, so if you come up with a better idea, and you say, actually, the solution to this isn't to build a tram line, it's e-bikes. They basically reject this because their argument is, I need to compare 3 tram providers so I can compare them on price, okay? And you say, but you don't need trams at all. And they go, yes, but then you're bound to win because e-bikes are cheaper than trams. So I can't add you to the shortlist, despite the fact that your solution may be inordinately superior, okay? Because you're not directly comparable. But innovations generally are innovations because they're not directly comparable. If you compared the iPhone to the Nokia or the Motorola phone that was dominant at that time, okay, and you'd compared it not on the basis of usability, but on the basis of the spec, you would have said the battery life is shit. The first iPhone had appalling, I don't know, you're not old enough to remember this, okay?
I am
you are
actually,
just about, okay?
yeah.
So the first iPhone, it barely made it to lunchtime, but people liked it so much, they were happy buying a huge bulbous case with a battery in it or taking a charger to work, and they just found a workaround, okay? Now, most innovations will often be slightly inferior in one dimension, but massively superior in another dimension. But if that dimension isn't actually part of your procurement kind of, what would it be? You know, short list, list of criteria, or, you know, key performance indicators, then you're going to get thrown out. And so it really does worry me in the extent to which B2B innovation is, I think, sometimes being really destroyed by the need to go through a process
Yeah.
which should be a flexible process, but has actually turned into a kind of, almost a ritual.
It's kind of a committee-based
Yeah.
kind of decision-making process, isn't it? It's interesting from an affiliate perspective because we've often tried to frame what affiliates do, and Adam talked about this in his keynote, this idea of like decentralizing innovation and authenticity. Because if you're a brand and you own all of your in-house assets and you're controlling that image and controlling how it's kind of distributed across the ad ecosystem, what affiliates are offering you is something a little bit different, because you're basically saying, here's the keys to my brand. You're the one that owns the relationship with an audience. Like, you have that direct proximity.
Correct, yeah.
And I'm having to trust you to articulate that in the way that you feel is best.
It was very similar in a sense. Obviously, this is at a much broader scale. This was similar to the extent in old traditional advertising when a brand chose a celebrity spokesman.
Exactly.
There was always the risk, by the way. You'd have to
Yeah.
insure against them getting into some hideous scandal.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's happened in the past, right? I'm
which
sure.
has emphatically happened.
Yeah.
That's why actually, cartoon characters were so desirable because they didn't have a life
Don't go off
outside the
script.
pay.
Yeah.
It's also a very intelligent thing to do, by the way, which is I always think that brand partnerships and affiliations are, in a way, should be the first port of call, particularly for a business trying to innovate. Now, there is an issue which I worry about, which is that generally, because of the need to justify cost with acquisition, it does a great job for products that have a high lifetime value. Credit card, say, or a bank account, or the adoption of some, signing up to Candy Crush, whatever it may be. It has a great thing for high margin products as well. It has a great thing for products that are bought on impulse, online. The only thing that does concern me about it is an unrepresentative sample of the marketplace, in that one of the points I've made to quite senior people in advertising is I go, look, I spend quite a lot of money on Unilever and P&G products, and they are in fact among the largest advertisers in the world, but I never see any online ads personally for P&G or Unilever products. Packaged goods, FMCG, in other words, things that aren't attributable because you buy them through a shop are going to lose out. Things that are low margin but relatively frequent purchase, fast-moving consumer goods, are going to lose out. And I had this strange thing where my daughters went to school, and they kept laddering their tights because they were required to wear tights as part of their school uniform. And a friend of my wife said, look, buy them really expensive tights because they do last significantly longer, and also because they're expensive, they'll take better care of them. So I went online to one of these premium manufacturers, and I barely saw advertising for anything else.
Really?
And it suddenly occurred to me, okay, their margin is going to be about 90%. It's an impulse buy, it's not like a car purchase, and it's hugely attributable, and these people are buying direct from us rather than through a retailer, so we're getting twice as much margin. And therefore, it made sense to them to advertise to be almost ad infinitum, because I only had to make one incremental purchase to pay for 10,000 impressions. Whereas a shampoo brand can't do that. Now, in many ways, for example, retailers looking to acquire new loyal customers, this is fantastic. It's fantastic, as I said, for high margin or niche products. It's brilliant for products people didn't know existed. I'm always going to see more luxury goods advertising, than I am for I don't know, hemorrhoid cream, or unless they target me very precisely.
Maybe there's a luxury version of it, so yeah.
There are always going to be some categories which advertise a lot more because they're highly image dependent, But the only thing that worries me about online advertising is that a really good media ecosystem, I roughly see ads for things in proportion to where the contents of my wallet go. And it's worth noting that we haven't really got that online. I don't think we had that on TV either.
No.
I think that was disproportionately the other way around. And you could argue the two are actually complementary. It depends what category you're in, to what extent, how you're bought. I mean, the earlier advertisers made a very, very, very good distinctions. There's a massive distinction between acquiring a new American Express Platinum Card member and and obviously selling jam on a one-off trial basis. But I do worry a bit that there's a kind of imbalance at work. Having said that, along with entities like Shopify, for example, and Klarna, they are doing a wonderful job to diversify and variegate online retail. And I suspect that we'll actually see what we see as two long tails. In other words, it is a long-tailed market, and there is going to be a sort of fat tail of smaller retailers serving niches.
Yeah, we often kind of think about when we're talking about affiliates is that you've got that kind of nicheification phenomenon that is almost part and parcel of the internet. People have been able to find their communities in ways that maybe in the past they weren't able to. And
it's worth noting, by the way, that personal recommendation is inherently powerful provided the person has reputational skin in the game. Okay? So if someone recommends something which they've been paid to recommend, does it mean the thing they're recommending is the best thing you could possibly buy? Don't know. However, it's worth noting that a lot of the time when consumers make a purchase, I always make this point, McDonald's isn't the most successful restaurant in the world because it's really, really good. However, it is really, really good at not being bad, okay? You know, you're not going to get ripped off. The food's going to be pretty tasty. You're not going to get the shits. The toilets are going to be okay. Your kids are going to be safe, okay? Right, there are a hell of a lot of not negatives. And we as marketers tend to focus on adding the positives. And actually, the bigger gain is often to be found removing negatives, removing fear, uncertainty, doubt. Who the hell are these people? And a recommendation from someone who needs to maintain their own credibility is going to be an 8.
We see that with like different creators too, and a lot of creators I follow, for every like one paid ad recommendation that they give, they'll do 4, 5, 10, because they want their audience to trust them and know that they're not going to endorse necessarily a product that they're going to.
By the way, I'm delighted to see Shark Ninja here, and I do feel deep down that they owe me at least a free air fryer, because what is weirdly true, you can go and research this on YouTube. I was basically the world's first air fryer advocate.
Really?
Really?
So I
was probably the second.
You were the second.
So,
No.
I don't have one.
And by the way,
Rob, we gotta fix this.
Don't listen to those people who go, it's just a small convection oven.
It's not. It's the best kitchen appliance I've ever bought in my entire life.
Thank you. And also, if you think about it, a convection oven is simply a ridiculously large and inefficient air fryer.
Yes.
So let's reframe that, because how often do you cook a whole turkey, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what I noticed was that pretty much 80% of people who bought an air fryer became air fryer evangelists. Most of us have a few products we'd be very happy to evangelize because they are genuinely so good that you're doing someone a favor by recommending it. I think many things lend themselves to affiliate marketing, which are what economists call experience goods. Which is you don't really know how good it is until you've tried it. Once you've tried it, you become a kind of weird swivel-eyed convert, you know, practically sort of, you know, going door to door. And so there are many, many things, I think, which only really can be sold that way through a person's genuine enthusiasm for the experience. There's no coincidence that Shark Ninja are here today in force, because, I mean, they are a brand created by affiliate marketing, right? You know, I mean, I think we ought to be talking about this more. Is this actually the future of how you create a brand? And actually, we should all be looking to Shark Ninja for lessons on how it's done. Who are your favorite clients in terms of the, you know, users of great affiliate marketing?
Can we answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't need to go in, but it's like it's
this is not an exclusive question.
Yeah.
Who are some of your favorite?
When you're talking about big global enterprise brands, like it's the likes of Samsung, Shark Ninja, a lot of them who are obviously attending the conference, and they've just been very open to working with lots of different types of partners and ad models. And it's not simply a case of like, you know, being happy to just do a bit of cashback over here or a discount code over there or maybe 1 or 2 media partners.
Samsung, in weaning people off the sheep-like devotion to the iPhone, which is not based on any rational...
well, that's brand, right?
Well, it's social pressure.
Yeah.
My daughter had, for a time, the top-of-the-range Windows phone, which had been given to me, actually, at a conference.
Okay.
And I already had a new phone, and she broke her iPhone, and she gave her this thing. And she admitted to me that the interface was the nicest mobile phone interface of any interface. Oh, wow. However, all her friends at school thought she was weird. And every time she took it out, she had to explain, okay? If you think about Coca-Cola, you never have to explain why you want a Coca-Cola, okay? Whereas if I go to a place and say, have you got a Dr. Pepper, right? Unless you're in Texas or New Mexico, you're going to be treated as a weirdo. Okay. Now, that's nothing to do with the product. It's entirely to do with the social context within which the product is used. So for Samsung, I'm a huge devotee. Now, they can never do this, but they should. I think these folding phones are absolutely fantastic. Now, actually, there's a very, very good reason I bought this, okay? Which they can never say. I'm old. I can't fucking fucking see. Okay, so about half the time I'll be trying to do something on my mobile phone. My specs are in the next room. I just can't see what's going on. Now, you can't market this as an old person's phone. Okay, but actually, you could have an elderly influencer. Obviously, be advertising to reasonably prosperous old people because these things aren't cheap. But they are utterly fantastic. There are USPs, which is the old advertising thing. That's a unique selling proposition, which is true to everybody. Okay, but particularly in the tech world, there are actually what I call ISPs, which are individual selling propositions. But the individualized selling proposition is, well, most people may not want one of these, but in your case, it's a particularly good buy. Because your eyesight's a bit fun because you're 59 years old. Okay. Now, obviously in mass media, you're never going to sell a Galaxy Z Fold 6 thingy, okay, on the basis that it's great for people whose eyesight's a bit dicky. But there's a whole subcategory there, undoubtedly.
The ISP thing, I think, is that maybe something that only becomes economically viable when you have something like e-commerce and online? Because going back to that thing of you're talking about fragmented niche consumers, but then suddenly, if you've got all of those niches aggregated over a massive geographic space, i.e., the planet, suddenly it becomes economically viable in a way that it wouldn't have done.
I totally agree.
A localized.
I totally agree with you.
Producer,
No, so that's true of manufacturing. To some extent, true of distribution. As distance isn't that relevant. Okay. Yeah. The famous thing, of course, in nicheism, okay, which you'll probably get edited out, is the famous phrase, "There's porn for that." Okay. Do you see what I mean? In that, once you have an audience of 6 billion people, no weird fetish is too bizarre for you to be entirely alone. Okay. So this is in some ways the retail equivalent of, there's a retailer for that.
Yeah.